Hi everyone, welcome to today's interview with the Masters. We have Dominic Domingo. Dominic is a production designer and he'll be teaching the master class of the art of color and light. I feel his work shows a great example of effective composition, beautiful design, and color. So please be sure to check his class out for registration. CGMA is now open for the winter registration. Seats can go by fast, so if you intend on taking a class, go ahead and register soon. This interview is open forum style, so feel free to ask questions at any time. I will relay them to Dominic and do my best to stay on topic so we have a flow. So please be patient if your question is not answered right away. I'll do my best to get to all of them. And yeah, without further ado, I'll be handing it off to Dominic.
Hello. We good to go?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Dominic Domingo. I'm not necessarily a production designer. I've been a production background painter and a visual development artist in both both traditional and CG feature animation over the years. I production designed one feature for the Bratz. What's the name of that? MGA. So I've served as production. Anyway, I'm an overall visual development artist. I call myself an illustrator and primarily in CG feature animation or traditional feature animation. So I guess I'm going to start just kind of giving you a breakdown of my career and showing some of my work. And hopefully, I'm going to focus on the work that's relevant to the class that I'll be teaching. So as Jonathan said, it's the art of color and light. So are you seeing this first color script, Jonathan?
Not yet. Could you show the screen?
Oh, I share the screen. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
1 second. Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so a million years ago, I went to Art Center. I'm sure you've heard of Art Center College of Design from 89 to 91, and I've now taught there for 16 years, so it's my alma mater. But, at that time, there were no entertainment tracks. The closest thing to entertainment that I, was available to me was basically I had interned at Disney Feature Animation between 4th and 5th term. And basically I was trained by Glenn Keane, one of the top animators in the world, Ruben Aquino, who was the lead animator on Ursula. So at the time it was a general internship and I was trained to become an in-betweener. So anyway, that was again between 4th and 5th term, so I was offered a job as an in-betweener, and I said, no, I want to go back, and get my degree, and they said, oh, no problem, just hit us up when you graduate, the job will be waiting, which of course was not the case. It took a little hustling to get back in. But anyway, at that time, because I had interned there, I definitely, in my upper terms, wanted to focus on an animation portfolio, but there really weren't any offerings in that area. So again, the closest thing that was available at the time was I did an independent study with Gary Meyer because he had done the Jaws poster, and I thought, well, that's entertainment. So I tried to create a visual development portfolio in my upper terms, but the burden was on me to create those opportunities. So anyway, I won't say too much. I want to go into the details that again are relevant to the class, but also I like to, I guess, talk about what I've been up to, because it can be inspiring to other artists who, there's kind of a little bit of an over-romanticized fear of committing and being too specific with one's goals. And I like to rattle off the different things I've done over the course of my career only because it kind of shows that you can't do it all at once, but you can do it all over time. So again, having taught at Art Center for 15, 16 years, and I actually taught the portfolio class for 6 of those years, it really does serve you to be specific. Now, Art Center really wants everyone to have a commodity and have a very specific portfolio that's geared toward the type of work that you are trying to land. And I am a big fan of that. I have a million examples of students that were served very well by being specific. And yeah, treating the portfolio as a commodity that's very much geared toward the goal. But I am showing a variety of genres and formats in my own career just as a little bit of license to say, you're not slamming the door on other aspects of who you are. There's plenty of time to do it later if you sort of forge your own career path. So I'm kind of flipped through a bunch. These are just color scripts. I'll talk about them in a moment. This is sort of more recent personal work. So I guess one thing I want to say is, although like this piece is largely about color and how light affects color, I'm thinking of a lot of different things. My work lately is largely about shape language and obviously style and motif and composition and a lot of things other than color and light. But I do think it's almost inescapable. Color and light bring the ring of truth to anything regardless of the style. So again, just a bunch of more recent personal work, exploring shape language.
Man, these are great. Really enjoying these.
Thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, but again, even, you know, this is character work. It's not about environment, but still the ring of truth can come with a really strong warm-cooler relationship, or what I call using saturation as luminosity. There's a number of, you know, tricks that I think you know, I'll be following obviously a curriculum that exists, but part of what I want to talk about today is where I'll be coming from and what I can bring to the table. So of course I have a strong foundation in literally Chevreul's laws of color theory and a lot of pretty hardcore academic or foundational principles that I'm going to, I guess, bring in on an as-needed basis. But there's also just little tricks, you know, being an animation. What I haven't said is once I did land at Disney, I worked on Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback, Tarzan, Little Match Girl, and One by One. So 10 years, and man, you know, it just provided a great opportunity to create a vocabulary of images. One example I give is, and I have to apologize, I have a cold, and I am going to be coughing a lot. But anyway, one example I use is on Lion King. I don't know if you remember the termite mounds, but basically Pumbaa and Timon, and I was doing the termite mounds, and my supervisor, Doug Ball, basically had me go outside and kick over a rock and just look at how the dirt crumbled. So you really develop a vocabulary of a variety of different subject matter and how to treat it. So the same goes with time of day, again, different lighting situations, different atmospheric conditions. So I feel pretty blessed that, you know, at some point I was able to draw or paint basically everything there is out there. So anyway, what I'm trying to get across here is my work right now is largely about shape language, and even when it's character-oriented, it's always going to have a concern for light and how light affects color and how light and color affect form. So the way I put it is they're inseparable. If it's got form, it's the product of light. In other words, if you can perceive the form, it's the product of the light. Therefore, it has a color. So as a background painter, and those of you that have done matte paintings or background paintings probably know, you really just can't use black in a matte painting. It belongs to the theater, and it does not belong to the set of atmospheric and lighting conditions inside of that universe you've created for the screen. So the example I use is, you know, in Pocahontas, we wanted her hair to literally be the only black object up there. So if you've analyzed the art direction, my friend Mike Giamma was the art director, and he's a real 50s guy. I don't know why, but like 50s became, his personal aesthetic became the look of Pocahontas. Now granted, turquoise, pink, and black are pretty 50s colors, but they happen to be Native American colors also. So it really was the goal for her hair to literally play that role, the black object. So even in your silhouetted foreground elements, you are not going to want those silhouetted foreground elements to crunch to black. So I trained for 6 months as a background painter to learn what's called the latitude that's necessary for film. So think about it. Everything has to breathe. It has to live inside of that atmosphere that you've created for the screen. So if you remember your light logic, you have form shadows, but inside of those form shadows you have ambient light, reflected light, which relegates the darkest values to the core shadow. So if you remember all of that, the core shadow is probably going to be your least saturated moment in that form shadow. And the same of the contact shadow. So inside of a cast shadow, you are going to have ambient light coming down and affecting that cast shadow. But literally where the object makes contact, we call that the contact shadow. So in 10 years of background painting, I literally never used black, and I'm not even a purist about color. But you'd probably use a dark violet and a 9 is as dark as you're going to want to go for film. But the point is, your cast shadows and your form shadows are always going to have ambient light affecting them. So only your contact shadows are going to be your quote-unquote black, and it's probably going to be a 9, and it's probably going to be a violet. And that is the only way to paint for film. So anyway, there's a whole learning curve there. Now, visual development art can be punchy, it can be contrasty, your darks can crunch to black, and your lights can blow out. Not a problem. It can be very punchy for your portfolio, but for an actual production matte painting or background painting, you're going to want to observe the rules for film. Because every single step of post-production, you're going to be trying to eliminate the polarization that happens with post-production. You're only going to get more and more contrast throughout post-production. So your whole life as a production painter is spent trying to avoid the crunching and the blowing out with your color choice. Is that making sense, Jonathan?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So anyway, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So this is personal work, largely about shape language, but in something like this, you can see how an understanding of light and color really is going to affect even your visual development work. Same here. I hope there is a little bit of a warm-cool relationship. I here am obviously using saturation as luminosity. And this was actually done for a company called Animation Lab in Israel for a film that was a huge money pit, and I don't think it's come out to this day. I've worked on it probably 6 or 7 years ago. And anyway, if any of you have heard of Animation Lab, it was a great venture. It was just a guy with money who wanted Israel to be known for something other than war. So he got his hands in media and entertainment, and that included animation. And so for this first film, they really said, we don't care to make any money. We just want to tell a great story. It has an environmental message. It's about a cornfield, a meadow that's taken over by genetically engineered corn. So it was a fun film to work on, but I think it was a money pit, and I don't think it's come out yet.
Oh.
So this was for Animation Lab. Okay, so back to school. At Art Center from 89 to 91, there was no entertainment. There was basically the term I started, they had just done away with fashion illustration, but it was primarily editorial and advertising. So advertising was, rendering water droplets on fruit, basically, highly rendered, pretty straightforward images. And then editorial was largely conceptual. What we now call, conceptual editorial illustration was sort of in its heyday. So it was all about the concept, and you really resisted a narrative, and I won't go too into that. So anyway, I was pretty academic in school. I think I was an okay draftsman. I was kind of that guy who could do a really great likeness of the model, which doesn't really matter in life, I've learned. But I had observational skills, and I could sight size and do all of that more atelier stuff. But of course, my learning curve has been to be more and more interpretive. But the point is, in school, I was pretty academic. I actually took my first oil painting class at 7. And I think I still have toxins in my bloodstream from, they would let you wash up with turpentine. It was through the parks. And they were like, oh, how cute, he's washing up with turpentine.
Oh, man.
Like, never mind that turpentine, the whole function is to dissolve the pigment from the binder, and which allows it to enter your bloodstream. I know that explains a lot. But anyway, these are oil, and these were during school. Same here, a little triptych of oil paintings. This is 36 by 48. It's pretty big.
Oh wow, that's pretty big.
Yeah, and I gave it to a friend who fell in love with it. It was hanging in a cafe, and he didn't realize I had painted it and developed a relationship with it. So I gave it to him, and now we're not even friends anymore. It's hanging on his wall.
Oh man.
Anyway, this is a little bit later. This was after I started teaching at Art Center. It's a former student named Shervin and my friend Akiko. This was actually for the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. And that's a digital version of my sort of oil painting look. These are digital as well. It's my nephew on the bottom. That's actually acrylic. That was during my stint at Disney. We had some internal shows, The background painters would often have shows. So here's the point is, it was pretty straightforward, pretty naturalistic, pretty realistic, but I think those strong draftsmanship skills have really served me, even though my journey has been towards more and more interpretive, or you could call it stylized content. So straight out the gate, I did a lot of work for Wizards of the Coast. I've done several cards for Magic the Gathering, and then of course I worked on Silent Hill. So in gaming, obviously the more naturalistic, realistic content was served by my draftsmanship ability and I think my observational skills. But in, again, production art for film, I'm going to talk about specifically how the observational stuff can come into play. So the draftsmanship is one aspect of it. But, and again, Silent Hill, probably the funnest, the darkest 13 weeks of my career. I was Googling things like, you know, circus freaks, anomalies, birth defects. And I actually went a little too dark, believe it or not. One of my, I think it was a thalidomide baby or something. It just wasn't, it just wasn't politically correct. So I went too dark for Silent Hill.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. They were happy with this.
That
Wheelchair
so
guy, they called him. Okay, but anyway, back to the academic stuff. You know, I really, especially now that obviously everything is Photoshop and very few people get out there and play, and I'm guilty as well. I don't practice what I preach, but I do think we should all be painting from the model. We should always be doing still lives. We should be plein air painting on location. And, you know, the whole point is a photograph will not give you the nuance that your eye can perceive. And if you can start splitting complements on the fly and you can start creating color interests by actually perceiving subtleties that are not going to come across in a photograph, that's exactly what you're going to need later to be more interpretive, if that makes sense, in your color sense. So these are oil paintings that I did on location, plein air paintings. This is in Tehachapi, California, near my parents' house. And these are digital. I'm sorry, the two of the LA wash on the right are not. They're gouache. But I think everything else here is digital. And a couple of these were done in Jerusalem, by the way. Actually, I'll get my pointer here. This one and that one, this was Masada. These were, and that was, these two here were Petra, if you've ever heard of that. Petra is the city that's chiseled out of stone. It was in Indiana Jones for 30 seconds, but yeah, it's the big city chiseled out of stone. So these three, the upper left, and then these two are done on location in Petra. Okay, so the point is all that observational stuff can go into your painting. And this is a very realistic, considering it was for a CG animated feature, it was actually for the Santa Claus movie, which has finally gained some momentum. Have you seen that trailer, Jonathan?
The Santa Claus?
It's really beautiful. It's kind of an Ivan Earl stylized, and I guess they're taking it to the film market. There's a really snazzy trailer, but if you sort of watch very carefully, there's a disclaimer at the end saying this is not in production, so they're still seeking funding. Oh, but it's really beautiful. So anyone that wants to Google that, I think it's just the Santa Claus movie. But anyway, this was years ago, and it had Jordanian money behind it. And the art director, not to gossip too much, but I don't really think she understood the rules of painting for film. So they just wanted a very immediate representation of everything, but it certainly wouldn't work. You know, you want to sort of create the staging that's going to allow the character to pop. So for example, the really dark wood here against the really light wall would create such a high contrast in the background that it, you know, it kind of robs you of the staging opportunities for the character. So everything I did for them, you know, this is a great study of, we called it the Great Room in the Orphanage. Santa Claus was raised in an orphanage, apparently. And so that was the daytime and the nighttime version of it. But anyway, when you get an assignment like this that's extremely realistic, considering it's for CG feature animation, you know, it's very important that you bring your observational skills to the table and that sort of library of imagery that you've accrued. So this is all for the Santa Claus movie. Okay. I'm so sorry, I just want to get through this part. So backing up, I interned at Disney. It was a general internship. It was not specific to the background painting department, and the entry-level position that I was offered was as an in-betweener. I said, no, I want to go back to school, get my degree, which I did. In my upper terms, I tried to create a visual development portfolio, but I had to cobble together those opportunities on my own. And then, yeah, when it came time to graduate, sorry, I said I was going to be coughing. Not only were they not in the front row at my graduation, but they were like, Nick who? I'm sorry? So it took a little hustling to get back in. Now, they remembered me, and I had scored very well on the internship. But of course, you know, timing is everything. So it's not like the job was waiting. I had to really hound my mentors and say, you know, remember me? I scored really well during the internship, and I'm graduating, and I'm ready to go. So there just happened, and you know, there's some value to every little war story I tell, but for what it's worth, the stars really aligned at that moment. I had sold a painting 8th term just before graduating, and it held me over till the day Disney called me and said, come in on Monday. I had $5 in my pocket when Disney said, come in on Monday. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it was pretty fortunate turn of events, but I guess that's my point, is there's a lot of myths out there, like, oh, you know, they'll never turn away good talent if they, you know, I've heard it all, and I've actually been that guy. I've been the recruiter at SIGGRAPH and you know, a number of different CTN, and of course, if you see somebody really promising, you're going to get their card or their promo, but you know, there's a myth that, oh, they won't pass up good talent, they'll create a job for you. Oh, please. Like, they have their pick of anyone on the planet who's remotely interested in animation. That is a fallacy. But, I don't know. So for me, the stars aligned, and there happened to be a budget on a little film called Lion King that was the first original treatment. Nobody knew it was going to become the phenomenon that it did. And there happened to be a budget that week for a trainee. Doug Ball, the supervisor for the background department, happened to be in the room that day. It's called the review board panel, so he happened to be there when this intern from several years previous, when his portfolio came through. Lisa Keene, who was the art director at that moment, also happened to be in the room. And again, there was a budget, so they gave me a test. I had a week to copy a Bambi background and return it, and so the rest is history.
Nice.
So during my 10 years there, again, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback, Tarzan, Little Match Girl, and One by One. So this is Hunchback, obviously. These are all acrylic. We had the option of working in gouache, but very few did. You might do sort of the real soft clouds in the back with gouache on illustration board, but obviously gouache is not going to stick to the cell. And the majority of what you do is on overlay, so you're painting on cell. So these were mostly acrylic. That's Hunchback also.
We had a quick question on those Santa Claus pieces from Chris Taylor. He's asking if the night and day treatment was in your brief.
My brief. I don't know what that is.
I
mean, I'm guessing it's what it sounds like.
Yeah, if you could elaborate.
Yeah, it was something they asked me to do.
Okay. I believe that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're... I'm so sorry. That was a little bit of an odd... Well, I'll be very honest, I was spoiled at Disney. It's a very, very well-oiled machine. And, you know, the union has fought for a lot of protections, so the artists are really well respected. And just almost everywhere else I've worked, it's like, you know, a startup company, or they don't really have all the kinks ironed out in what I call their production pipeline. It's been a little bit less than, I don't know, sane. And so that was a pretty crazy experience, but I think what happened is the story just wasn't there yet. So we had a treatment, but of course it was evolving. And quite often the visual development is evolving along with the story development. And in fact, that's what visual development is. It propels the story to a new place. So, you know, we bring levels of subtext that only visual artists can bring, and it actually does inform and affect the writing. But this was a case where, you know, the script just wasn't there, not even the bare bones. So from what I recall, you know, there were vague sequences, and they knew there were some, what the mood of certain sequences was going to be. So there were certainly nighttime sequences and daytime. So I actually think this is where not going to remember who, but somebody sort of breaks into the orphanage. So the only mandate I was given, and I don't know what a brief is, it's often verbal. I don't get a written brief very often. But this was just, hey, let's do a nighttime version and a daytime, because there were multiple sequences that took place during both. And now a little more is coming back to me. This was a winter feeling, so the sun was quite low. Anyway, so here we have...
quick question from Sergio. You tend to use cold colors for the shadows. Do you use warm shadows on objects with cold colors?
Of course, yeah. Again, I have a demo prepared if we get to that, but quickly, that's maybe what this class is. The learning curve for a lot of people is going to be the following. I think we all know how to create form using light. So if not, we'll review that. But like I said, there's terms for light logic. There's your incident light or your highlight. There's all your midtones or halftones. There's your form shadow with the core shadow inside of it. There's your cast shadow with the contact shadow inside of it. We just call that light logic. So I think most of us know how to create a convincing lighting scenario using value. From that point on, almost all the palettes you've probably learned if you've taken any traditional oil painting classes at all. I don't know, let's start with a monochromatic palette or a tonal palette. I guess tonal is black and white, monochromatic is different values of one hue. So then you move on to slightly more risky, slightly less assurance of harmony as you move into more sophisticated palettes. So as you move into, a triadic palette or split complement, the more sophisticated ones, we often accompany our light and shadow with a warm-cool relationship. Now, those, again, a lot of you probably know, cooler lighting scenarios can be tricky, especially on skin tones. If you think of skin as a neutral orange, which it arguably is, when you hit that with a cool light, you're neutralizing everything, and so probably most of your saturation is going to come out in the shadow. So anyway, the answer is yes, but I think that's largely what the class is. When you begin to step into more sophisticated ways of portraying a warm-cool relationship, there is this concept of using saturation as luminosity. That's a great example. The orange is obviously the color accent here. So there's going to be a fire. This is really fortuitous that this came up next. But this is Pocahontas. There's going to be obviously flames right there in the center of that fire pit. We are using saturation as luminosity. So now as you move into the cool shadow, you do see it split. You have violets and greens. And so anyway, that's Chevreul's laws, and I might do a demo on that later. But you want to maintain saturation on the lit side, so you're using saturation as luminosity, and you're going to want to desaturate the cool side toward that end. So what a lot of people know is, those that had traditional color theory, Chevreul's laws, and I have a handout that I can show, it's 12 different ways of saying it's all relative. So you may remember if you hold up a value 5 chip against gray, a value 5 neutral gray against white, it's going to appear darker than it actually is. You're going to misjudge it to be darker. You hold the same chip over black, you're going to misjudge it to be much lighter than it is. So that's the best way of saying simultaneous contrast. Everything's relative to its environment. But hue, saturation, everything is subject to that relativity. So I guess what I'm saying is, in this scenario, a lot of people know the best way to get your orange to glow is to play it against its complement. That's Chevreul's laws that say a color will appear more, in French they say striking, which doesn't mean a lot to us, but I think we would say saturated against its complement. The next law, which is the one most people don't really know, which is slightly more sophisticated, is a color will appear yet more saturated against its neutralized complement. So that's why we split the complement, is to create a blue that's, using violets and greens. The blue that's created is much less saturated than one straight off the outside of the color wheel.
Right.
And it's hard to talk about in theory. I do have a color wheel that I can show at the very end. Anyway, this was one by one. Nobody saw it. But it was for the upcoming, it's a long story, but there was after Fantasia 2000 did so well, we started, instead of laying people off between projects, we just thought, hey, let's create another Fantasia, because Walt's original concept was let's keep adding to it and re-release it every few years.
Mhm.
Well, Disney dropped the ball for about, I don't know, 40 years on that concept, so this was an attempt to resurrect it. So when Fantasia 2000 did so well, we thought, hey, let's take some world music, just create little sequences without a, deadline or a production schedule, and when we have enough of them, we'll release a movie. So sadly, we squandered them. I think this came out on a DVD, and then Little Match Girl, I think, came out theatrically with a feature. But this, if you haven't seen it, Google One by One. It's a really beautiful little film about a township in South Africa. This was for a company called Moonscoop. It was for, not proud of it, but it's for the Zuzu Pets feature. Great DVD. That's the lowest I've stooped. No, I'm kidding. I'm pretty proud of everything I've worked on. But I did call my sister when I was working for this company. No, I definitely, we might need to edit this out. But anyway, I did call my sister and I said, I'm painting a Care Bear. Like, I think I've hit a new career low. And it's because apparently they can borrow you. Like, I didn't know that. But if you're being paid, you can be borrowed by other productions. So I didn't sign up to get involved with the Care Bears, but I was borrowed for a day and I did paint a Care Bear. And I had to call someone and tell them. So this was actually for Blue Sky in New York, or Greenwich, Connecticut. And nobody saw this either, but it was a really beautiful film called Epic. Did you see that, Jonathan?
I did not, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and not enough people saw it.
I will have to watch it.
I'm telling you, it's beautiful to look at. I think there's complaints about the story. But
Gotcha.
anyway, these were, well, I think story is in the eye of the beholder. Some people, if it's not commercial, they think it's bad. So I'm a big fan of obviously non-linear storytelling and experimental storytelling. So I do think good or bad stories in the eye of the beholder often.
That's true.
But you've heard light on story, so this was maybe really visual, but I think some people had a problem with the story. I liked it. So this is another one I went a little too far with Ozzy. You notice he's got a little missing leg there. Wait, where'd it go? Yeah, so they see the little they want a little swirl of hair where his leg is missing. But I think I went too far with the cataracts. And, so this was the mother. I'm sorry, it's the surfer brother of Sid. Remember Sid?
Yeah.
It's John Leguizamo. That's his brother, and we had never met the brother or the mom. So this is the first time we're meeting his family. So it's just kind of a surfer brother, and then the white trashy mom. They kept saying, think of Married with Children, Peg on Married with Children.
Interesting.
So now here, by the way, I do a lot of the work I get, even though I am often seen as an overall designer, and I can do props and vehicles and weapons and character and environment and story beats and color scripts. I feel lucky if I can get my hands on all that. And at Blue Sky, by the way, they don't even call it visual development anymore. I believe at Blue Sky they call it the art department. It's very production oriented. It's not the Blue Sky 20 years of visual development that you often picture. It's very production oriented. And it's very much like, okay, we need a prop, we need it now, design it now, and you just hand it off directly to production. And my understanding is it's pretty similar at DreamWorks. It's the design department at DreamWorks, not the art department. But it's very much synonymous with production, and it's very much, handed off to production on an as-needed basis. So I do get a lot of the work that I get because I'm a painter. I'm not just a designer who can create great shapes. I can actually paint. So, everyone can craft the type of career they want, but I do feel like that gives me an edge in some scenarios, the fact that I can paint. And here quickly are my Maya models. I learned just enough Maya to do some crappy models, but it helps, helps overall. I mean, these were paint overs on the actual model, by the way. So we did rough color, which would be done from a really loose sketch by Peter DeSev. I would do a rough color pass. Then it would be sent to the modelers, modeled a little bit, and then I would do sort of these paint overs on the rendering of the model. Sorry, do you have any other questions, Jonathan, up to this point?
We have one. Are there any books on shape language or in general that you would recommend?
Wow, shape language. Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I mean, I guess I would say, well, I have to think about it, but I'd say any sort of research you can do on the visual development artists that are working right now that you admire, you can learn from them. So whoever that is, just get a hold of the art of books. The sketchbooks from each artist are pretty impressive. And I actually am not opposed to learning from other artists. When I was in school, I wanted to be a self-made man, and I didn't really go through my Egon Schiele phase or my Klimt phase like a lot of people did. But if I could do it all over again, I would. I would give me a lot more mileage toward finding my voice. So whatever that is, voice, flair, that thing that sets you apart, it's a journey, and the more you can expose yourself to and literally get it in your body, like if you can draw literally on top of somebody else's designs and get it inside your body, you're going to suddenly understand why Al Hirschfeld does that through line. Well, it's not the center of gravity, it's not the contrapposto, it's not the spine, it's the line that moves the eye through the drawing as if it were a composition in its own right. So anyway, I sorry for the non-answer. I would just say really do the research and get to know the artists you admire, and if you like their shape language, buy their sketchbook, buy the art of books. Allow yourself to mimic them in a step on your journey toward finding your own voice. Mm-hmm. And so really I'm just going to end this here with just a bunch of color scripts. This was again for the Zuzu Pets feature for Moonscoop. Same here. These heavily rely on saturation as luminosity. So it was a really startlingly saturated orange. These are called tufas, I learned. Orange tufas, but then you see that the complementary violet shadow has to be sublimated to that to use saturation as luminosity. So more color scripts. And then my own project, color script. And then I will end with, so now my career has taken me many different places. What I didn't say is, while I was at Disney, I wanted to have other options if and when I ever decided to leave animation. So I continued to burn the midnight oil for my entire 10 years at Disney. I moonlit. I worked for Putnam, Random House, Lowell House, all the major, Penguin, they call them the big five publishers. And I did books for young readers. I never did a picture book, but I did covers, I did interiors, books for young readers, middle grade readers. I established relationships with all those art directors, and I had been through that drill. So I did get to a point where I said, I'm going to write off the freelance and stop killing myself, because I squandered my youth. No, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I was, Art Center's a pretty demanding program.
Yeah.
So I didn't drink enough in college. But I did write off the freelance, and I said, until it's my own book, I'm going to just kind of stop killing myself here. So, again, when I did leave Disney, and it was probably 13, 14 years ago now, that's when I started dabbling in gaming. Like I said, I did all the characters for Silent Hill 5. I've now worked for DIMG, Disney Interactive Media Group, and a couple titles for them. So, dabbled in gaming. Yeah, gaming. Oh, and then Disney Publishing. I've done a lot of the Pixie Hollow books. Strange, and it was not through Disney Feature. It was a totally different division, unrelated. So anyway, my career has taken me many, many different places. But the latest is, when I left Disney 13 years ago, I started making live-action films. And I'm going to quickly show you my reel, just because it all informs where I'm coming from in terms of my teaching. So I'm telling you, if at Art Center, if I had my druthers, all of my entertainment arts students, that's what the track is called, by the way, and I founded it. When I first pitched my background painting class, against I think 16 years ago, it was the first elective to run in illustration that was remotely entertainment related. There was a character design class previous to that, but it was in product, and it was really just kind of big walk-around costumes for theme parks. So, for good or bad, I basically founded the entertainment track. But anyway, since then, of course, the whole track has taken shape around that, and we have a lot more offerings, and it's awesome. But what I want to say is sort of my experience with live-action film has really taught me a lot about lighting for film. Here's a black and white one that I'm going to show. And it's no different than film noir. When you didn't have color to pop your character from the environment, you damn well better have a strategy with lighting. So I call it back, key, and fill was the bare minimum in film noir. And then you might have an eye light or a kicker or a hair light or other kinds of extra measures, but bare minimum, back, key, and fill. So I do think, you know, my entertainment arts students would benefit from having a little more film history under their belt before studying animation history, and then you'll see the connections between all of it. So I am going to play this. Did you have any other questions, Jonathan, before I launch into this?
We have one question. Do you have any tips on time management to improve workflow?
Well, Art Center really sort of is so demanding that you sink or swim. So I think for me, I don't know if anyone else suffers from this, but a lot of artists can be night owls. We can be very linear or compartmentalized, or I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think a lot of artists have completion issues. I know when I was very young, I just had to get it out of my system. I'd work till 3 or 4 in the morning because I had completion issues. I would not go to bed until the piece was finished. Well, Art Center very much taught me to keep things on the back burner and keep juggling and keep all those balls in the air and kind of let it go. If something can't get completed tonight, let it go. So the juggling act, I think, was very early put into my system. So I don't know about time management because everybody's different, but I do know the creative process is something all artists have to learn to wrangle. And that is no small thing. And again, if I had my druthers, we would have way more classes about the creative process. So I don't want to be too long-winded about it, but I think people hit different walls at different times. So people, you know, I'm sure a lot of you will relate to this, you have conditions. Some people work best with a fan on for white noise, other people work better in a coffee shop with the white noise of, you know, others and access to caffeine, and other people have very specific conditions, like a chicken strapped to their left ankle and, you know, throwing sugar over their left shoulder. But when I see somebody with too many conditions on their creative process, I often wonder, do you even like to draw? You know, if it's that delicate, you must not really love it that much. So my non-answer here, or I guess my long-winded answer is time management, blah, 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 but how about kind of having access to your creative process 24/7, or at least 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week? That is no small thing, and it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
So that's my answer. You know, you do have to be able to draw on it. And I guess so the more you can learn about the creative process. So if you investigate the Wallace model, for example, or the 7 other supposedly accepted models of creativity, I actually think that takes the fear out of it. So for example, a lot of people love the idea phase. They really feel they're most alive when they're kind of getting their gut level expression out on paper. And then in the execution phase, they feel this fear that they've lost their inspiration if they have to render, or if the execution feels a little less inspired. My feeling is there's always what we call the hot and cold parts to the creative process. So my friend Dave Zabosky, to give him a nod, will say, you don't just go straight for the goal, you stalk it. And he has a diagram where you go, here, I'm going to give you a visual aid, where you circle, and you don't just go straight for the goal, you circle it. So you go through what we call left brain and right brain phases, hot and cold. So the example is when you're drawing from the model, at one point you might be just feeling the pose and feeling the sorrow, and every stroke you put down intuitively contributes to sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. At another point, you might be trying to figure out what the hell's happening to that arm as it disappears behind the torso. And you might bring in what you know rather than what you see. That's a cylinder that's foreshortened, and I need a cut-in to show that overlap. Okay, so I call that a more intellectual process. So within that drawing, you've vacillated between hot and cold, thinking and feeling. And what I'm offering is within every piece, you're going to do that. So if you suddenly feel you've lost all your inspiration because it feels like you're executing and rendering, how about understand its value to the creative process, that it's necessary, and somehow find the joy in it? I actually find it strangely meditative to render. You know, even lettering, I hated it in school, but you know what? It gave me inner peace. It transported me to alpha wave state, which is pretty awesome. No linear thought. What could be better than that? Okay, so should I play this?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Or are there more questions? Okay, so this really quickly is when I really had to think like a DP or a director of photography or a cinematographer, call it what you want, but when I really had to learn lighting for film, and I do think everybody should do their little film studies. So whether it's German Expressionism or film noir, everybody, if you haven't had to do it in a class yet, should rent some classic films, or I guess nowadays it would be download them or stream them and stop them and do little marker studies. So I'm going to actually go through this without sound at 4 times the speed, and it's going to read like storyboards. But hopefully more than anything else, you're going to really see composition. Okay, here we go. 4. And when you eliminate color too, you're really understanding how important composition is. I think if it is taking an ingredient out of your soup, suddenly other things become much more important, like value structure, like lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And some of this is sort of what we call found lighting or naturalistic lighting. Some of it is for the interiors, is very much invented.
Can you answer a question at this moment?
Sure, of course.
What is the most difficult design problem that you have faced?
On the job, like related to animation or just in general?
I'm going to assume in general at this point.
Wow, God, well, I will say filmmaking is the most, I've kind of gotten into it with my sister about this. Like she's the mom of 4 kids, and they all play football. And she, well, yeah, they're all grown up now. But she put herself through college while putting her kids through college. So she's a true.
That's amazing.
But anyway, yeah, when her kids were involved in football games, she said, "Oh my God, it is the most like to make a Friday night football game come together is the most complex undertaking anyone could ever do. You have no idea how many things come together." And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? Have you ever dealt with a crew of hundreds of people? And do you know what I mean? If it rains, you're over budget and over schedule. So I will say just making a film, because you're kind of relying on the gods at that point, you know? So many things have to come together. So again, sorry if that's a non-answer, but I will say live action filmmaking is just intense. You really have to think on your feet, you know?
Yeah, he did specify, I guess he's asking in animation.
Well, again, I'm trying not to be too vague, but I think wrangling your creative process and having access to it 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week is a big challenge. What I often really gently try to tell my art center students is it really isn't for everybody. So, you know, in theory, an illustrator can work in, we used to say Iowa, in a cornfield, as long as you had access to a fax machine. Now it's email, and you know there's all kinds of technology, so you really can work sort of isolated at home and just deliver your work. But within reason, on an entertainment project, you will be dealing with directors, art directors, fellow artists in your department, whatever department that is. So I think one of the big sort of wake-up calls is that you know, of course, you have to be able to work with others, and that takes many forms with many different people. Literally, I keep trying to enlighten people to the creative process, but the more you can learn about left-right brain activity as well, the better. So one example I'll give is when you're on the right half of your brain and sort of in alpha wave mode, and you've sort of tuned out the world, and I see this in my students. They may have been drawing for hours at home, then they suddenly have to show up to work and quickly print out show up to school and print out their work, and then, I don't know, be a human being? It's like the last thing on their mind. So at Disney, I really quickly had to learn, and now my mouth isn't working very well today for various reasons because I have a cold, but I remember at Disney, your office door could fly open at any moment, and you would have to have a conversation with an art director, again, a fellow artist, a director, and your mouth may not even work. So when you're on the other half of your brain, your motor skills are not ready to roll. Does that make sense to you, Jonathan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I see it in artists. I see it in my students. Like, they're not even ready to formulate a sentence. So that's one thing I would say. It's not being sociable per se, but it's being communicative and actually being a little bit articulate. So again, if at Disney we would use the example, it depends where you went to art school, but brilliance, saturation, chroma, and, okay, saturation, brilliance, chroma, there's one other word. Intensity. They all mean the same thing.
Mhm.
So do you know what I mean? If an art director came up to me and said, oh, that's too bright in an area of your composition, that's too bright, that would mean absolutely nothing to me. Of course, I would gently say, well, do you mean the lighting effect is too bright, or that there's too much luminosity? Let's nail that, let's boil it down. Is it hue, value, or saturation? So if every color has a hue, value, and a saturation, is it the saturation that's making it quote-unquote too bright, meaning luminosity is too great, or do you mean it's too light in value? So anyway, not every artist is going to be verbal or articulate, but within reason, I do think, do you know what I mean? You should have access to some vocabulary.
Mhm.
Okay, so that was sort of a black and white, and that was to say, real simple thinking, do your little film studies. Here is my director's reel, and I'm going to make this full screen. Where is it? Where is it?
There you go, the first one.
Full screen. Yeah. But sadly, I have to go to the game. And I don't know if you're going to hear the sound or not. I'm going to try the trick. Give me 1 second. Okay, ready? Okie doke. So Jonathan, about how much time do we have left out of curiosity?
We have about 5 minutes left, but we can extend it
Oh.
if everyone's okay with it. We can go like another 15 minutes if you're good with that.
Well, I do want to, yeah, I'm fine. I don't know about if anyone else has a hot date, but I did want to leave room for questions, but two other things I wanted to put in. While I was at Disney, I mean, often people want to know this. It was mostly traditional, as I said, for 7 of my 10 years at Disney. Tarzan was the film where we slowly started transitioning to digital technology. So of course, Pixar had its own path, and CG films were very much up and running, but CGI technology, we called it, now it's just CG technology, within feature animation had its own evolution. So Tarzan was the first film where we wanted to paint directly on the wireframe. So without going into too much detail, I was one of the 3 artists who developed the alpha release of what we called Deep Canvas. So it was a proprietary software based on Paint Tool, which was based off Draw Tool. And it was a way of course, allowing the camera to move around 360 degrees inside of a virtual environment, but not having to model every single element, just select elements. So I'm going to quickly play a scene from Tarzan. And not every one of these are my scenes, but I got my hands on most of these. So I have a separate reel of just my scenes, but you'll get the idea. Can you hear any sound on this at all?
No.
Anyway, just try to get a look at what might be modeled, and we painted directly on the wireframe for the modeled elements.
Interesting. There was sound.
So, oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's because I held the microphone directly up to
Oh,
the headset.
okay. Gotcha.
But somewhere in there, I'm not going to say where, but if you freeze frame that on DVD, I carved my initials into some of those trees there.
Nice.
I'm sure you guys have heard all the myths, but there's satellite dishes on the rooftops in Hunchback. If you look at the gold in the cave in Aladdin, there's like CDs and roller skates and all kinds of incongruous elements. Okay, so that's that, and then again, in the interest of just quickly fitting stuff in, so that was the deep canvas experience, and I would say, the point is, between my Maya experience and sort of the deep canvas experience, I think it really aids me in my designs. I think ZBrush is definitely on my list. I need to learn ZBrush. Where to go? Oh, there's one more thing. In case anyone's interested, I actually created this video for one of my art center students. So we called it the badgering technique. From day one at a company called Walt Disney Feature Animation, Snow White, there has been the industry standard painting technique that's called the badgering technique. So now, those of you that have seen Princess and the Frog, that was pretty much the first Photoshop emulation of that badgering technique. So without, dear Lord, what's happening? Going on and on too much, it's a sort of way of keeping acrylic wet and workable for hours at a time if you choose to, and it's a way of not committing to detail until it absolutely matters, which would be literally where the character registers, the focal distance of the camera. So in case anyone's interested, I don't have a URL for you, but just go to YouTube and Google Dominic Domingo badgering technique. I put the entire demo online. Tell me. Feature animation, where I worked on films like Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback, Tarzan, Magical, and badgering technique was the industry standard almost straight out the gate and remains so throughout animation history. It's a technique that allows the artist to keep acrylic or gouache wet and workable for hours at a time. Okay, did you have the audio on that?
Yes.
Okay, so you get the idea. You can just Google that on YouTube. And then finally, you might have been perplexed. You saw the Nameless Prince towards the very end of my JPEGs. And just in the interest of inspiring people to say your career can take, many different twists and turns if you choose to craft it that way. The latest is after, some of my films won awards and of course got into a lot of festivals, got distribution through Lionsgate and TLA. Feel pretty lucky on that front. Well, apparently from that, I garnered a writing resume. I sort of woke up one day and realized I never really set out to be a writer. I just wanted to be a filmmaker and tell stories. And so I only wrote screenplays in the interest of then telling the story through film. But wow, I have 2 IMDb SAG films that have distribution, one from Lionsgate, one from TLA.
Nice.
That is called a writing resume. And yeah, that's something a lot of people work really hard to achieve. They come to LA with their 5-year plan or their 7-year plan, and I just came across it as a byproduct of wanting to tell stories. But I've also written since I was 7 years old. I got my first typewriter at 7. So I decided to put that on the front burner, and I was also turning 40. This was 10 years ago, no, almost 10 years ago. And I guess I was feeling my mortality, so I started writing my creative nonfiction essays. You could call them my memoirs. Some of those got accepted to anthologies, won awards, so I really put that on the front burner. And I guess to end this, the Nameless Prince is my young adult urban fantasy novel.
Cool.
It came out in 2012 through Twilight Times, if anyone wants to check that out. And then I started working with some former students on the comic version. So again, I guess the quickest way to learn about it if you're interested is just go to namelessprince.com. There's no the, it's just www.namelessprince.com. There's the promo, the self-promo for today. Okay, so I'm done. I got it. I fit everything in. I'm very proud of it.
Awesome.
Is there anything? Any
Great.
questions? Where do we go?
Yeah. We have. Feel free to ask any questions. We can probably get to two more. There's one here. It is from Sergio. He's asking, how important is a degree for a company like Disney? Because I'm getting a design degree and not an art degree.
I love it. That's a great question. The conventional wisdom with which I cannot argue is it doesn't matter at all. However, I'm the one guy who plays the devil's advocate. Uh, so the degree itself doesn't matter. I mean, one example I'll give is Doug Ball. I worked for him for 6 of my 10 years at Disney. He was my mentor. Like I said, I trained for 6 months as a background painter, and thankfully, I worshipped this guy. He's was an amazing mentor, and I just have all the respect in the world for him, not just as an artist, but as a human. So how spoiled was I? But anyway, Doug was self-taught. He never did go through a program. However, I think even he would say, or many artists I know that are self-trained would say, they hit a wall, and I think art school just speeds up your exposure, speeds up the process. So for that reason alone, I think it's great to be in a program. And I'm not here to toot anyone's horn. Our art center has served me very well. I think there's a lot of schools that are, taking people's money and really not giving any exposure to the real world or any sort of transition into the real world. So anyway, I am a big fan of a really well-founded program, whether you finish up and get your degree or not.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Yes, definitely.
I mean, my friend Dave Zabosky, he's one of the lead animators at Disney. John Smith was one of the, I think he supervised on John Smith and did some pretty cool sequences for Fantasia 2000. Anyway, Dave Zabosky, I mentioned him earlier actually with relation to creativity.
Yes.
And the creative process. I went to Art Center with him, and he actually was one term away from getting his law degree, and then freaked out and said, what am I doing? I don't want to do this, and quit and went to art school. So now,
Wow.
I was between 4th and 5th term, which is midway through my program, but Dave was one term away from graduating, and again, we were both offered jobs at the end of the internship, and people thought I was crazy to go back to, Art Center and get my degree when I could have taken the job. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, it all worked out, but Dave, I guess, felt like he had to grab it while it was hot. And so he has 2 degrees that are elusive. You know what I mean? He was one term away in each case from getting that degree. I think he would say it doesn't matter to him.
I see.
I just think it speeds up your exposure in the process.
Interesting. Cool. So we have one more question from Chris Taylor. He says, Dominic, I'm a big fan of your interior illustrations and landscapes. Can I ask if you have more characters to view? I'm a keen character designer myself, and I'm fond of your character designs.
Wow, strong words. Thank you. Yeah, go to. I feel like I'm self-promoting, but and really a lot of what I scrolled through today was just the equivalent of scrolling down my blog. So I was a little bit selective, but just go to www.dominicdomingo.blogspot.com. That's my entire online portfolio. So, yeah, www.dominic with a CK, domingo.blogspot.com.
Awesome.
So I'm all over. I mean, sadly, I had to get a Twitter account to promote my book, but I try not to tweet. But I'm everywhere. I mean, the Nameless Prince has a Facebook page. You've got namelessprince.com. You've got whatever I just said, my online portfolio. Yeah.
Great.
And then that badgering technique, if you want to check that out, that's on YouTube.
Yeah, I put it up for people to check out on the chat so they could see it.
Awesome. Yeah, there's definitely a lot, to answer the question, there's a lot more character work on there. But I give it just kind of a cross-section and a smattering, and it's in no particular order. I mean, one thing to think about is I actually change up my portfolio depending on the opportunity. So now that everything's online, I mean, there's very few companies. I think Nickelodeon still wants a flat book, and Cartoon Network. You know, some of the TV animation studios still want you to send or drop off of what we call a flat book. But largely, most of the work I get nowadays is from, you know, maybe sending a couple digital samples, but really just sending the link to your online portfolio. I'm sure everybody knows that. You can now create profiles and sort of upload images into a database. There's varying opinions on whether that ever gets looked at or not. I actually think it does. But, you know, short of those sort of measures, it really is online nowadays. So what I do is I gear up the piece. I have so many years of work that I just put a cross-section on my online portfolio. But I recently created an entirely separate blog specifically for Disney Interactive Media Group and put all my gaming stuff on there. And then I just privately share the URL with the parties that are interested.
Got you. Interesting. You said it was a flap book or a flat book?
Flat book. That
Flat
just means
book.
a printed version of your portfolio.
Okay, got it.
Now, you know, nowadays, my graduating students, of course, have a flat book. And that's awesome for what we call Super Thursday, grad show, on-campus interviews. Or even if you go to CTN, I'm sure a lot of you listening have been to CTN. If you go to a convention and you have the opportunity to sit down face-to-face with somebody, might as well have a flat book, although a lot of people show it on an iPad or some other digital format. I guess my point is it's mostly digital now. So you're going to be sharing a URL anonymously, but just know you can sort of change up the content of your online portfolio and just privately share the URL if you want to limit the content for a certain audience.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Probably have time for one last question from Chalky. What's up, Chalky? In your experience, where is the industry moving towards to?
The animation, I guess. Sorry, I'm assuming it's the animation industry. Well, I wish I had a crystal ball. I mean, a lot of us are, of course, saddened that 2D is taking the back burner right now. Andreas Deja is doing a 2D feature in his home. Of course, Europe, Studio Ghibli, the Far East, a lot of places other than the United States are still doing 2D. A lot of television animation is still using 2D techniques. So that's hopeful to me. I have a love and an appreciation of it, and I think a lot of people do. If nothing else, the artwork is archival. So I don't know, I guess a stock answer to that, I think multimedia is kind of, if you go to the festivals and look at sort of the experimental techniques that are being shown at the festivals, you might see, you know, full CG with blend shapes. You might see stop motion animation with CG. I don't know if any of you have seen Paperman, but you might have sort of toon shading on top of fully modeled CG. So I'm just a big fan of storytelling and whatever medium is demanded by the story you're trying to tell. So I don't have a crystal ball, but in sort of checking in with my students who are the future, they seem to be interested in multimedia. If you guys get a chance, check out a little beautiful French film called, and it's embarrassing to say, but I think the title is Madame Tutti Putli, Tutti hyphen Putli, P-U-T-L-I. It's really beautiful stop motion, and they project live action eyeballs on the model.
Wow.
Yeah, so multimedia, that's where it's at. Woo!
Cool. I think I found it on YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty.
And Peter and the Wolf, if you guys haven't seen that, check out Peter and the Wolf. I'm just rattling off, these are a little old now, but again, when I was at Animation Lab in Jerusalem, AWN sort of partnered with Animation Lab and brought over the Show of Shows, which at the time was one of the more premier animation festivals. And every major company like Disney, DreamWorks, PDI, Pixar actually has a budget for experimental animation just to expand their technology. And you will see these beautiful little shorts in the festivals. So I don't remember which company did Peter and the Wolf, but it had a budget behind it, and it's really beautiful to look at.
Was it a Russian or Polish? Okay.
No, yeah, Polish maybe.
I think I found it. Okay,
Well,
cool.
Is it who is the composer? Is it
Sergei Prokofiev.
no, the music is I'm confusing. Yeah, I think it's a Polish production, but I think the composer Strakowski is Russian.
Okay, got it. I think I found
Now
it.
I'm showing you the words.
He has
pretty famous Stravinsky. I don't know.
okay.
Is it
Uh
Tchaikovsky. I'm combining Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky. It's I think Stravinsky, which is Russian, but the animation is Polish.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. It's like a boy in a red jacket and he's holding a swan or a duck.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, cool.
I mean, there's been many versions of Peter and the Wolf, but this is one interpretation of the themes that are intended in the music.
Okay.
But I think it always includes, it's always been interpreted as, and now the duck, and now the gun, and now the boy, you know.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dominic. That was great. Yeah, and everybody else, thank you for being here, and hope to see you.
Thank you guys. Thank all you invisible people out there. Thanks to all the nameless, faceless people out there.
Sounds great. Definitely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care, Joe.
Take care, you too. Bye.